A Darius Garland trade could be on the way in Cleveland, with a bunch of rumors now popping up that the Cavs are exploring trading the 25-year-old All-Star in a desperate attempt to shake up their roster after a string of disappointing postseasons. So what exactly are these rumors saying? Well, first and foremost, Darius Garland is a legitimate trade option this offseason for Cleveland. It's not just rumors, it's not just people like me putting together fake trades on the internet. It is a real thing. They are looking at changing this roster in a significant way. We've known this for a little bit. There were past rumors saying that in terms of players that were safe on the roster, it was Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley. Those are the two guys they want to build around moving forward. And the other half of their big four, so to say, Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen, are both not only safe, but they would be pretty aggressive in looking at trading one of, if not both of those guys to change this roster around. And the Garland stuff is not exactly new. If you go back to last offseason, there were a bunch of reports about how he wasn't super happy in Cleveland. The Donovan Mitchell situation wasn't great for him. If Mitchell re-signed, he was going to request a trade last offseason. Garland came out and said that wasn't true, but there had to have been at least a little bit of smoke to that. And now, just a year later, we're getting more reports that Garland could be on his way out in Cleveland. Now, one of the newer wrinkles to the situation is that Garland actually underwent surgery this offseason to fix a toe injury, and he's going to be out for a couple of months. Now, he should be fine for next season. It's not the end of the world. It's not like it's something that's going to take him out for the entirety of the year, but it could certainly impact his trade value and his trade situation. And the first question, of course, here is why would they do this? This is a team that was unbelievably successful in the regular season last year and was beat up in that Pacers series, and if they were fully healthy, might be in the NBA Finals right now, given the fact that the Celtics fell on the other side of the bracket. Well, one of the main reasons would just be change for the sake of change. When they brought in Donovan Mitchell, they've gone on a nice run the last couple of seasons, but they haven't been the postseason threat that they've wanted to, and a lot of that could be attributed to the redundant skill set of Garland and Mitchell, as well as the defensive infrastructure of Donovan Mitchell alongside Darius Garland. Garland ideally would be someone that you would pair alongside a really strong defensive guard that could guard the other team's best guard, but the way the Cavs are set up, one of those guys is going to be hunted all the time. A lot of times that's Darius Garland, and they just don't really have a great defensive infrastructure in the backcourt, not to mention the fact that those two guys offensively both kind of want the ball, both want to create a bunch. It just doesn't always work, despite how great they were in the regular season last year. And again, defense, playoff disappointment, redundant skill set, all of that stuff can easily lead to a trade. Two possible difficulties, however, with the Cavs finding a trade before we get to the actual teams and the trades that are being rumored and are possible. One, finding a team that actually wants Darius Garland on his contract that pays him $40+ million for the next couple of seasons might prove to be a little bit difficult because he hasn't exactly been the most healthy player over the last couple of seasons. He broke his jaw last year. He was in and out of the lineup this most recent season, including in the postseason. If you're investing a ton in a trade, you'd like the guy to be healthy, not to mention the fact that he is making a ton of money. I think Darius Garland is an extremely valuable trade asset. If I'm not quite a contender, Garland is my number one trade option out there. Like, if I'm not a Kevin Durant away from competing for a title, I would be very aggressive in trying to go get Darius Garland. I would love for my Brooklyn Nets to get Garland. I think he would thrive outside of Cleveland as the primary guy, but there are probably teams around the league that are a little bit concerned with the injury issues and then potentially the contract as well, despite the fact that he's just 25 years old. The other problem for Cleveland in finding a deal here is you have to get back win-now pieces. This is not a situation where they're trading away Darius Garland for a bunch of picks. They're not resetting. They're trying to reconfigure their roster in a way that gives them a better chance to win a title over the next few seasons around Mitchell and Mobley. So this isn't a situation where you're just going to be trading away Garland for young guys and picks, which makes it more difficult, not only from a salary perspective, but to get a trade put together that makes sense for Cleveland. Having said that, we've got three teams that are either rumored or I think would make a lot of sense in exchange for Darius Garland. The first is a team that we've talked about in a previous video already, and that is the Orlando Magic. The Magic have needed a backcourt player for the longest time. They've needed a creator. They've needed a spark of offense, and that's exactly what Darius Garland would be for them. They've got Paolo, they've got Franz. They're not trading either of those guys in exchange for Darius Garland, but is there a trade structure in which they could get Garland without giving up either of those two guys? That trade would have to be centered around Jalen Suggs, and in this case, you add Tristan da Silva, and you give them the 16th pick in the 2025 draft that Orlando has. You can add more picks, you can do whatever you want to. The salaries are super close with these two numbers put together, so there's a lot of other options you could add or take away from here for Orlando in terms of adding Darius Garland, and I think it's a deal that Cleveland would at least think about because Suggs is a really good defensive backcourt partner alongside Mitchell. He's a much more complementary player than someone like Darius Garland. De Silva could develop into a nice wing player, which they need more of in Cleveland, and they get that 16th overall pick to either add in the draft this year or use that pick to dump some of their contracts or make some other moves on their roster if they want to trade away someone like Jared Allen plus this pick that would add value to their team as well. Kind of splits Garland into a player in Suggs that fits better on their team and a couple of extra assets as a way to just shake up the roster. The problem is there's lots of rumors that Orlando is not a team that Cleveland is interested in trading Darius Garland to, and the reasons for that should be pretty obvious. They don't want to trade one of their better players to like a rising up and coming Eastern Conference opponent in the Orlando Magic, and so theoretically they'd like to trade Garland to a Western Conference team because they don't want to be helping a team like Orlando make that next step by trading them Darius Garland. Not to mention the fact that they might just not be a huge fan of Jalen Suggs. They might not think it's a great fit. They might be concerned about some of the injury stuff, and if they don't want Jalen Suggs, then Darius Garland is not going to Orlando because they're not trading Franz or Paolo, and the numbers salary-wise or talent-wise, asset-wise just don't work for Cleveland. These next two trades, though, are teams and trade constructions that I have not seen anybody talk about in exchange for Darius Garland. First, let's talk about the Houston Rockets. The Rockets are going to come up in almost every single trade video that we have this offseason because they are super well positioned to add a player or two players to this roster and really take off next year. They have a ton of assets. They have a ton of complementary players. And I think Garland is someone that is a little bit of an under the radar target for them. We know they're looking at Giannis. We know they're looking at Kevin Durant and some other guys. But if Garland becomes available, that kind of backcourt perimeter creator is exactly what this roster needs. You could argue this roster needs that more than they need Kevin Durant, more than they need Giannis. A backcourt playmaker setup guy is arguably what they need more, and potentially a really good replacement for someone like Fred VanVleet. So here's the trade construction. Dillon Brooks, Jacques Landale, Aaron Holiday, those are both just contracts, and then the 10th overall pick in this draft. This isn't a perfect setup for Cleveland, but it's a little bit similar to the Suggs construction, where you get a complementary player that fits alongside Donovan Mitchell in Dillon Brooks, and in this case, the asset that you get is much better because Suggs is a better asset than Dillon Brooks. You get the 10th pick in this draft to kind of make up for the gap between Suggs and Brooks. It isn't a perfect construction for Cleveland, and frankly, it's not really perfect for Houston either because they've got the Fred VanVleet team option, and VanVleet alongside Darius Garland doesn't really work. Maybe you'd have to look at moving that. Obviously, you have that contract you could use in this deal if you wanted to, if you didn't want to include Brooks, but I don't think that Cleveland is all that interested in Fred VanVleet. But if for whatever reason the Cavs are like, yeah, we want to split Darius Garland into Dillon Brooks and the 10th pick in this draft, add some young talent or use that 10th pick elsewhere to try and go and get somebody else, there's a lot of options for Cleveland once they make the Garland trade if they choose to do so. And if they're getting extra assets, there are other ways they can improve their roster once they get some of these other assets. It's, in my opinion, less likely than the Orlando thing just as a trade construction, but given the rumors that they don't really want to trade with Orlando, you got to start looking towards the Western Conference, and if you look at the Western Conference teams that would trade for Garland, Houston pretty quickly goes to the top of the list. Now, there's other constructions here if you want to make this more interesting for Cleveland, where it could be Dillon Brooks plus Jabari Smith plus some draft compensation. This doesn't feel like enough to me if I'm Cleveland because, again, you want some of those win-now pieces, and just swapping Darius Garland for Dillon Brooks does not help your team next year. It does not improve your team. So it's difficult for Cleveland to actually make this move, but I think it's an interesting construction, and it's an interesting team to take a look at overall in Houston because there's a lot of different trade options that they could possibly put together in exchange for Garland. Last up now is probably my favorite trade of the entire video, and it is the New Orleans Pelicans. Nobody really knows what's happening with the Pelicans. It seems like everybody is available. They're trying to trade Zion. They're trying to trade all these different guys, right? Like, they have so much talent on this roster. They've still got future picks, but they're not all that good collectively. Where are they going? Well, Garland could provide them that focal point moving forward. You don't know what you're getting out of Zion, but if you get Darius Garland, you know you have a point guard setup guy moving forward for the future, for whatever else you add to this roster over the next couple of seasons, and that at least gives you a starting point that isn't Zion. In this scenario, Cleveland would get Trey Murphy and Kelly Olynyk straight up. That's the deal. Those two contracts fit perfectly together. Olynyk is really there as a contract, but could help Cleveland next year with a front court spacing issue that they've had in the past. And then Trey Murphy is probably one of the more underrated players in the entire league, especially on the contract that he's on, and a Cleveland team that's going to be very aware of their second apron issues, luxury tax issues, overall payroll issues. That is a great value contract at a position of need for Cleveland. They've needed this sharpshooting three-point wing kind of guy for a while, and Trey Murphy is exactly that. If I'm Cleveland, I'm definitely looking at this deal. If you're not a huge Trey Murphy fan, you're not going to want to take the deal. I can totally understand that, but I think the Cavs they'd think about this one. They'd have a couple of meetings about it. They'd seriously consider it, because if you're trading away Garland, the best thing you can get is a guy that guards and shoots and is big. And that is exactly what Trey Murphy is. And he fits really well with a bunch of different lineup combinations in Cleveland. Depending on what they do with the rest of the roster, potentially trading away Jarrett Allen, things get super interesting super quickly. Now, you're putting a lot of responsibility on someone like Donovan Mitchell, especially if you lose Ty Jerome in free agency this offseason, but that's the case in any Darius Garland trade. And if they wanted to get one kind of win now piece back, I think Trey Murphy is near the top of the list. The real question to me is whether or not New Orleans would actually want to do this. Does this represent too much of a win now kind of move for them while they're still trying to figure out their roster? All of a sudden you're paying Darius Garland $40 million a year, and the value of the Trey Murphy contract exists for them as well. So it's a big question mark whether this would actually work. But right now, these are the best 3 trade ideas I could come up with for Darius Garland. If for whatever reason Cleveland doesn't want to trade him to Orlando, I think the overall likelihood of him getting traded this offseason does decrease, unless there's some team that I can't find and can't think of that's going to come out of nowhere. But I really like the construction of all 3 of these deals, despite some of the difficulties that we talked about earlier. There's a real possibility, though, that Cleveland actually makes this move, that Darius Garland is on a new team, which adds a whole new wrinkle for the Cavs going into next season.